have ever thought that this young 10-year-old boy would be preparing to go to Camden Military Academy for really standing up for himself. One of the hardships I faced as a kid, but was not a hardship, actually helped me grow and develop, and I used it to help my future experiences in life. Growing up in the 90s was fun, but there was always, like in every home, a lot of stuff that doesn't get talked about. There were some things happening at home that did not make me feel very good. Of course, I grew up in a blended home that eventually became broken. I ran away when I was 10 years old. I hitchhiked from Gastonia, North Carolina to Spartanburg, South Carolina at 10 years old, smoking cigarettes and a little weed along the way. And I ended up getting in some trouble for that, but I was not happy at home. Some things I'd rather not mention that were taking place made me feel uncomfortable, and it was kind of some hardships. But I did love being a kid. These are more positive and happy moments of me as a child. It's hard to believe that this child would go on to have just a very mixed life as an adolescent teen, and some of the hardships I would face, one of which I'm going to talk about at Camden. Before I get into talking about Camden, I think it's important that I recognize just not to forget who I am and how far I've come. There's a lot of stuff that I don't mention in these videos because it's just too personal and a bit more than I want you to explore. I came from being this adolescent teenager who was confused, angry, upset with the world, felt mistreated, and then honestly went into drugs, hanging out with the wrong crowds, to being locked up, and eventually getting out of that, getting my high school diploma, becoming a fitness instructor. That was a big accomplishment for me. Becoming a light heavyweight bodybuilder, athlete, just a handsome young man, but I still carried that baggage around, as I mentioned before in my other videos. This is a weight that was a big weight on my chest and in the back of my head subconsciously for many times. Military school was just the start of it. But now I'm looking back and I'm thinking about the joy that I had, these good moments, just how far I've come. And I want you to recognize, as I tell my story, who I am and how far I've come, and remember those points, not necessarily the bad things. The person I became, helping other people, coaching other people, encouraging other people. And a lot of this had to do with my mental health and how mentally healthy I was. A lot of therapy over the years, much therapy. So I'm an advocate for mental health, huge advocate for mental health. Some of my accomplishments, like opening up a shop, being a mechanic for almost 2 decades, being a fitness instructor for almost 2 decades, and getting closer to finishing my master's degree now to become a licensed clinical counselor, and hopefully a scholar here soon doing research on solution-focused therapy and intervention to help other people. This goofy, dog-loving person who is just a humble person at heart. I may be tough on the outside, but I am very much a humble person at heart. I want you to remember that as I start to talk about my story at military school. Of course, this is me today, clean-shaved, took the beard off, feeling good about myself, and feeling good about sharing what I'm about to talk to you about from when I went to Camden Military Academy. Camden Military Academy, Camden, South Carolina. I literally called it hell on earth. I was sent there because I got expelled from public school when I was in 6th grade, all because of a kid who didn't want to stand up to me and fight me because he was picking on me. I'm not going to mention his name, even though that was many years ago. He went and told the principal that I made a gun for it. 1, I would have never done that. And 2, I was always taught you stand up for yourself. But this kid kept flicking me in the back of the ear on the bleachers. And I told him after school today, me and you were going to have at it. And he went and got scared and said that I was going to bring a gun to school and shoot him. Of course, they expelled me from public school. The principal believed them, even though my parents at the time advocated for me. I got sent to Camden Military Academy. Of course, I also had some other charges as well, too, for setting a 10-acre field on fire and when I was in 5th grade, and also a minor possession charge when I did run away here to Spartanburg, South Carolina at 10 years old with speed methamphetamine found in my pocket. Of course, I was also sent to a group home as well, too. But I learned a lot of good values from Camden Military Academy. Some of those values stuck with me for the rest of my life. Of course, it inspired my grandparents to advocate for me, and they were always there by my side, as well as my aunt, who is no longer with us. Many years ago, she passed. But I learned things about myself and about other people that have helped me over the years. Camden Military Academy sucked. The hazing was bad back then. You got picked on, you got bullied, but I made the best of it. I made an effort to strive to do well with myself. Unfortunately, I was told I couldn't return because I got in too many fights. Of course, for standing up for myself. I've never been one who liked bullies. I was always one who liked to advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. Camden Military Academy sucked. My little brother was always my inspiration, of course, my aunt who passed away many years ago. But I was not one who always liked fighting. I just liked standing up for myself. I could deal with the name calling and the words, but it was when you started touching me and pushing me or hitting me, that's when I stood up for myself. I was told my second year it would be a good idea for me not to return back to military school because I was known as, my nickname back then was Beefy Redness, as some kids called me. I started working out a lot, got a bit beefy, started taking martial arts again, and I started standing up for myself. When kids wanted to bully other kids, I was not the one who wanted to be the target. My second year, I got the reputation of not being that one to mess with, but my first year considerably was worse, of course. My adolescence years were something different, that's for sure. I was in and out of group homes. I was emancipated at the age of 13, got incarcerated in Department of Juvenile Justice multiple times. Eventually, when I was 16 years old, I got tried as an adult, went to Gaston County Jail. And that was all due to a lot of hatred and anger I had towards other people, though you couldn't see it from these photos. But I was a punk at the time, growing up as an emo / punk / freak, whatever the heck you want to call it. Heavy metal was a big part of my life. It was my escape, was playing music. I always played guitar and stuff, but the crowds I hung out with, I was done doing drugs. I had done every drug under the sun by the time I was 16 years old, except for stick a needle in my arm. Never did that, but done everything you could think of. There were many times that I wanted to spend being with my family, but when I was with my family, I was also in another world. Spending times with my family was tough because I still had some anger towards them. I wanted to go back to being that kid again, that kid who was almost innocent. But being an adolescent, I was trying to figure things out. Living on the streets was no fun. I mean, I may not look like the person you would aspire that was living on the streets, but coming from where I come from, yeah, it was harder than what you could say. There's a lot of music, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of reality in Doug Durst, Limp Bizkit's music, because he did grow up in Gastonia, North Carolina, even though he doesn't tell everybody that. I still had a big, humble heart, but it was hidden under all this anger, all this resentment. At heart, I really wanted to go back to being a kid. I missed those moments of being with my family personally. This adolescence teen was confused, distraught, abused, and just angry and overwhelmed, anxious and scared. But eventually it came out. There's a lot of stuff I'm not talking about that I will share in some of my other videos coming up about the growth and development I experienced growing up through some of those years. But military school did teach me a lot of positive morals and characteristics. At heart, I still wanted to be that young man. I miss some of those moments, but other times I don't. There's times where I look back and I can reminisce and I'm like, man, I really want to go back to being that teenager. But most importantly, it was like my little brother who helped me out the most in my family. If I knew then what I know now, maybe I would not have gone to military school. Maybe I would not have gotten into trouble. Maybe I could still be this sweet and innocent young boy. But my life experiences have been both positive and negative, and they continue to grow and develop into those relationships. Most of all, I'm thankful for those positive ones. Even those who have hurt me and I have hurt, I'm very loved by them, and I love them very much and very deeply. Of course, I appreciate you watching this and hope this has encouraged you as well. So like I've done in the other videos, now I come to you and I'm going to self-reflect a little bit about what you watched and what you heard. Of course, I feel like this offers a better not really impersonation, but better perspective, because now you're hearing me, not just the voice behind the video. I know what I shared was about me going to military school, but there's a lot of underlying things that you did not get to hear. Some of those things I don't feel comfortable sharing because they might be a bit personable and maybe I wouldn't want some people to hear them, but I do want to say that yes, I went through a lot. There's a lot of positivity in my videos and some of what I share, even the photos, because I want to remember those more importantly. I want to reflect on those. The negative stuff is more of what you hear me talk about. Yeah, and it's kind of like weird that you would think, why would you put positive photos, but yet you're talking about negative things? Because subconsciously, that's what we do a lot of times. C.S. Lewis would often do this with a lot of his philosophical works when he was writing. One of my favorite ones is the Screwtape Letters. He didn't even want to publish it. He didn't even want it to get out there because it's the battle of good versus evil, one side over the other side, and both sides are talking to each other about what's moral and what's immoral, and these unconscious, subconscious memories that are deep inside of our mind, and when we dig into those, it can be a little traumatizing, but we also have to think about who we're reflecting upon, who our audience is. So I intended to talk about military school. It sucked, but as you can see, it taught me a lot. Even those 2 years I was there as a young adolescent teen, I carried on proper hygiene. I carried on how I fold my clothes, how I take care of my laundry. I like having a clean home. I like having a clean house. I'm very orderly. Some of the structured things I learned from there taught me that Camden sucks, to be honest with you. It's formerly known as Carlisle Military Academy. It is the middle school and high school of the Citadel. Same uniform, same classification, you can name all that. I knew many of my former cadets who went on to be service members in the military and who went to the Citadel. Me, I didn't want that really. I mean, I did want to go in the military, but that wasn't necessarily up my alley at the time. I did learn a lot of things there, but the hazing was intense. There are some people that maybe if they end up listening to this video who remember what it was like bullying me from when we were at military school. If you're out there listening, I'm not going to say your names, but I've never forgotten you. And I honestly would like to reach out and tell you, hey, I've forgiven you for the things that you did. I forgive you for the name calling, not just the name calling, but the hazing. But I haven't forgotten. I've moved on from that. Of course, I did fight back as much as I possibly could. I was never the one who stood down completely. I was scared. There was plenty of times, I will admit, I was scared. Being at Camden, there was some moments where, yeah, you have COs who look out for you, and these COs, they will, they're there to advocate for you, but you are ultimately it's up to you to make the proper decisions and the proper choices. You have to be responsible. There's a core that you're stood by, the core cadets, the motto, you're supposed to stand by that. However, back when I went roughly 25 years ago, a lot of things were different. A lot different. And I can remember a lot of fights that I got into. In fact, I reminisce on those quite a bit. And this was one of those times this morning that I felt, you know what, I want to share my experience about that. I got kicked out of public school. I mean, I got permanently expelled from public school in 6th grade. I didn't have a problem with fighting, so to say, but I did have a problem with people who bullied. I always did. I always felt that if you were going to be a bully, why? Because someone's got to say something to you. Yes, I did get into trouble. There were other times that, yes, I did undermine authority, like any teenager did or any child did, but I didn't like bullying. I didn't put up with it. The kid that day on the bleachers in 6th grade, 2 weeks before the end of the school year, I hadn't been in ISS or OSS, out of school suspension, or in school suspension, and I'm almost a month. I'd actually been doing pretty good in my grades. I was a very smart student. I'm still a very smart person today, but I was distracted. My ADHD got in my way. I wasn't properly medicated like a lot of teenagers and children are today. Back then it was a little bit misconstrued with ADHD. And of course, growing up in the South, you were looked at as kind of like there's something wrong with you and you shouldn't act or behave that way. But I remember that day on the bleachers. I'm not going to say his name because it would be, it wouldn't be right. But I was listening to my old AM/FM headphones, my AM/FM Walkman. I had it on my head, the big one with the antenna. It was actually yellow with a black band. You turned the knob over on it was the left side that showed. It had AM/FM radio. I was listening to 93.3 The Planet, which still is today. 93.3 The Planet, rock and roll music and grunge music at that time. And this kid came up and started flicking me in the back of the ear, and I looked at him. I said, "Hey man," I said, "me and you today, after school, you're not getting on bus 360," because I knew what bus he rode, and I can say that. I said, "You're not getting on bus 360. I'll see you after school, about 2 blocks off the school grounds. I'm going to beat the you-know-what out of you," in front of his friends. And they're like, "Oh, Nick's gonna beat you up." And I just went back to my normal business, put my headphones back on, went back to it. About 30 minutes later, we're lining up, getting ready to go to class. Again, 2 weeks before it in school. And the resource officer, one of them comes up to me, puts my hand in those zip tie handcuffs, those big, thick zip ties. Puts my hands behind my back, puts them in there, grabs my book bag, takes me to the assistant principal's office upstairs and says, "All right, Reinhardt, where's it at? Where's the weapons at?" And I'm like, I'm clueless at this point. And at this point, when they put me in the assistant principal's office, they actually didn't just have me detained with the zip ties. They had handcuffed me to a wooden desk and handcuffed my feet to the wooden desk as well too, because we had those old wooden desks around you. But I was in the assistant principal's office in that, and I was like, "Dude, I don't know what the hell you're talking about." Like, I'm so confused. I was so alarmed because I hadn't been in trouble in at least a month. Like, for me, that was exceptional. If you knew who I was, like, if you were the type of person that looked at me the wrong way or said something, yeah, I might say something smart to you, but if you like approached me in inappropriate, I was like, dude, I got into fights because kids, they wanted to pick on you and would come up and push you and shove you and flick you in the ear, whatever. I swung. I had a problem with that. I would turn around swinging. It was not because I was always angry, but I just didn't like bullies. I saw a lot of kids get picked on, and I didn't like it. And I remember them saying that, and of course, this happened to be that same year that Columbine had happened. Within a year of that, they said, "Where's the gun at? Where's the gun at, Reinhardt?" And I'm like, at this point, I'm like freaking in my head. I have no idea what you were talking about. I'm so lost right now. And they open up the door, and there's that kid with one of his little entourage friends. And he said, "Yeah, tell him what you said to me. Tell him that you said you were going to bring a gun to school and shoot me, and that you had one in your locker." At that point, he was lying, so I was like enthralled and infuriated. And 2, I was like, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, so I lost it. I tried to break that desk free because I was going to beat the tar out of him. They called my stepfather and my mom. They came up there. At this point, I'm like in tears because they're talking about expelling me. This is going to go on my record. I already had been in trouble with the law. I already had set a 10-acre field on fire when I was smoking cigarettes outside of my elementary school, skipping school one day. Yes, I did that. Accidentally decided, hey, make a little small brush fire. I was curious, and it blew up because it was hot and dry in the middle of fall, or middle of the end of summer, beginning of fall, and the wind caught whiffed of this dry grass, and the next thing you know, flames were everywhere. So I already had that on my record. I already had a minor possession charge on my record. Well, actually, I would have that a little later. And I was upset, man. Like, this was just horrible. It made me so angry. Here's this kid who's lying about me and not standing up for himself, and in my head, he was a pussy. Just forgive my language if you're out there listening to this, but that was what was going through my head. And my stepfather had made a rule with me. He said, "You won't get in trouble if you don't start the fight. As long as you don't throw the first swing, and as long as you don't do it on school property, you're good." I made sure that this time I hadn't been in trouble in a month, that if I was going to get in a fight again for whatever, then I wasn't going to do it on school property. I knew the bus that this kid rode. I knew he could skip the bus that day. I even went downstairs and called my stepdad Like, and I remember, as I'm thinking about, like, I remember, like, when this happened, I asked to be excused to go call my stepdad and said, hey, can you pick me up after school today? Because, I'm going to get in a fight with this kid. And of course, he was cool at the time. He's like, yeah, man, I get it. Thank you for not doing it at school. So my stepdad and my mom showed up, and they're not buying it. They don't believe what this kid said. For one, my stepfather didn't even have a handgun. He never owned a handgun as far as I knew. We didn't have one in the home. And two, I think it was just a timing, because within a year of this happening, Columbine had happened, and of course that was a major event. That was very tragic. My heart goes out to those people and those victims in all school shootings today, because that's wrong. There's no excuse for that. So as I'm saying this, I am recognizing and reflecting that yes, my heart goes out for those people, because that was wrong and it's still tragic today. And I think that more advocacy for children and teenagers who are troubled is helpful. And going back to my story, I'll talk about that a little bit here in a moment, but going back to my story, they permanently expelled me. I was allowed to take the end of grade test that year. It was a few months after that I ended up going to Camden Military Academy. It was either that or going to another alternative school, or being back in a group home and dealing with all that mess. So I went to Camden. And don't get me wrong, it's not just an alternative school. It's an alternative school that your family has to pay for too. It's not really cheap either. The things I learned there were good academically. The structure was good. I liked my sergeant major that I had in my company. I was in Charlie Company. He was definitely like a father figure to me. He was a Vietnam vet. He was a ranger during Vietnam, and like most of the guardians that we had there are parental figures, and he was a good man. But the bullying still took place there, and when it happened there, you had no choice but to fight back. You didn't get expelled for fighting back. You got in trouble. You got maybe some demoted with your rank, and you had to go watch a parade field, and you got demerits taken, whatever the case was. And especially if you brought contraband or anything like that on to campus, which I did a couple times, and I get in trouble for doing that, bringing cigarettes and dip and things like that. But there was a lot of kids there who they needed help. And thinking back on it, as I'm getting older and I'm almost 40 years old, I've worked with a lot of teenagers, both coaching and now in mental health. I've been working with children and adolescent teens. I've been working with adults as well too, but reliving those traumatic childhood experiences, I understand how that affects people. That's why I'm pursuing mental health. That's why after being a mechanic for almost 2 decades, being a fitness instructor and a coach, I want to advocate not only for those who are hurting, but be a voice to those who are not speaking, and advocate that mental health practices do help. Back then, it wasn't recognized as much. Back then, you went to a school guidance counselor and they may have heard you, but not like today, where there's a lot of therapists who come into schools like I have done. Every part of my internship, I went and did school therapy, good school counseling as an intern school counselor, not guidance counselor, but working as a therapist, intern therapist, going in. And most of what I did in practice was solution-focused brief therapy. But I learned and I heard the stories, and I remember myself reflecting. I do my best to not have countertransferences. So number one, I don't do that. But hearing them and knowing I've been where they're at when they're hurting, I know some of the childhood trauma that you've experienced, some of the things going on in their broken home. But being able to offer them a way out, being someone who's safe to be around, someone that they feel comfortable with, and offering that sense of hope, that nourishment, that nurture in a way that comes from a therapist's perspective of, these are some cognitive behavioral skills that we can work on. These are some SFT skills we can work on. These are some child-centered SFT skills that we're going to work on. Validating them, not pressuring them, not telling them that they're wrong for being who they are, that they're different, not putting them down because they get in trouble at school. They have ADHD, they have ADD, they have ODD, whatever it is. I'm not there to judge them, but being there to help them. I've done a lot with art therapy. I really am fond of it. Of course, I like child-centered play therapy as well too. I've used that with teenagers, and even some of the stuff I've done, like the feeling heart with adults, that has been beneficial, and I found it beneficial myself in therapy. I didn't start going to therapy. I mean, I started a little bit as a teenager, but I didn't really get into it until I was in my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, and of course, I still go to therapy occasionally. It's been very helpful for me as well. As I reflect back on what I went through at military school and even into my teenage life, not just run away, getting emancipated, racking up charges, as I've mentioned in one of my other videos. Some of these were felonies, some of these were misdemeanors. I struggled. But I do believe that if you can be that humble and nurturing person to other people, don't judge them. Part of my video, I pointed out some of those things that, yeah, I was a punk. There was at one point, I even had a mohawk at one point too. I started tattooing myself. I still have some of my tattoos from when I was a teenager on my arm here. Some of them are covered up because they represent something that shouldn't be there. There's scars. There's more scars than I have tattoos I can show of. I figured by now I'd probably have 10 kids, 10 wives, and a bunch of tattoos, and look something like Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit, but I don't. I feel like I'm a bit more moral than that. So this is my way of expressing that, and I hope that if you've listened to this video and the other videos, you've heard me and you have heard what I've had to say, and you felt compassion for it, but you also understood where I'm coming from. Maybe you didn't have the same experience as I did, but somehow you are moved by this. I encourage you to, one, keep your support, find out who supports you and who is supportive of you. Two, see a therapist, one that works with you and your personalities click. And three, be accountable for yourself. It's not worth it going off the deep end. Yes, it can happen, and yes, those traumatic experiences can impact that, but if you're down and out that bad, seek help. My spirituality is important to me as well too. I'm not perfect. I don't even call myself a Christian because I'm not a type of believer that most people are. My mindset is more of, I'm more open-minded. I'll talk about that in another video, but I'm open door. I didn't become a believer until I was in my early to mid 20s. Thought I knew what it was. Had more of a theistic perspective. But like C.S. Lewis, I struggled with good side, bad side, going back and forth morally and immorally. But anyway, that'll be open to another video. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I hope it's helped you in some way and impacted you. If it has, feel free to subscribe. I'm not looking for subscribers as much as I am looking just be the advocate out there, because my ultimate goal is to be a scholar, do research, and of course teach as well too, and to help train other people to become more like-minded in their mental health approaches, physically, as I've talked about, psychosomatic, and mentally, because you're still going to go through some of those things, or you may know someone who's going through them. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day.